Hello, everyone. Now we're going to go over the concept of attribution, scope, and data in Google Analytics 4. This is a presentation that's based off of a presentation that ROI Revolution gave. They are a digital marketing agency out in the Carolinas. They primarily focus on e-commerce. And I thought that this was a really good presentation on how to better understand the rules regarding data in Google Analytics. So we're going to jump right in. So we mentioned this concept scope, right? So Reddit, what does scope mean, right? And how does a scope or the scope focus the effect, or how does it affect the data that we are seeing? So first of all, let's say scope. Think of it as like a perspective. It's a characteristic describing the extent to which a metric or dimension is applicable. Um, Remember, a metric or dimension is applicable means a certain event that occurred, right? So to what extent is this applicable? And we're going to give an example soon to explain what that means. But what we see here, let's get a little bit deeper. Scopes, right? So different classes allows us to attribute credit at different levels of granularity. So looking at different scopes, we can attribute credit at different levels. With scopes, we can see what generated an event or a session, and then zoom out to see what originally brought the user that generated that session. So the example that Bill and I were talking about, and this will become more clear as we go through the deck, is imagine that there is a person who really likes going to the Natural Museum of Science or the Natural Science Museum. And they bought a membership and they go to the museum throughout the whole year. So there was something that caused that person to go to get a membership and to visit museum throughout the whole year. Now, let's say they visited the museum 3 times that year, once in January, once in June, once in December. Each time that they visited the museum, there must have been a reason and different things that have happened during that time. And then imagine that during that visit in December, they went to visit the oil and gas exhibit. There was something that caused them to go and see that oil and gas exhibit. So I could look at the person in 3 different levels. The way that that person interacts with the museum throughout the whole year, each time, each visit that the person comes to the museum, and then in a particular visit when they came to the museum, the different exhibits that they saw. So let's take that sort of example and we're going to move it forward. So in Google Analytics, we have 3 scopes, 3 ways of looking at the data. The first one is a user scope. User scope means I'm looking at the data from the perspective of the individual, the highest level, that person. When I look at a user scope report, it's going to tell me what was the first thing that brought them to the website. Okay. So example would be like a Google ad campaign. Very often, someone sees a Google ad, they click on it, and then they come to the website. So in the case of the user scope, it's once again, what's that first thing that brought them, right? So that guy at the museum, what's the reason that he bought that membership for the whole year? Now, the next level session scope. When we're looking at this data, it's not looking at what brought them the first time. It's just looking at each time they came to the museum. What's bringing them there? Okay. Now, when I look at data from a session scope perspective, it's going to report the last non-direct interaction from me. So meaning if they heard on the radio, ooh, there's a new Egyptian exhibit, and then they saw an ad in the Houston Chronicle paper, and then they decided to go to the museum, we're going to give credit to that newspaper article that they read because that's the last thing that they read before they actually drove. I'm not going to give credit to the car, right? But I'm going to give credit to the actual newspaper. Finally, we have the event scope. And this is going to be moving away, but the attribution model that I select in general for my Google Analytics platform. In the past, Google Analytics by default worked with last click attribution. The last thing that brought the person to the site gets all the credit. I can actually go into Google Analytics and set up the default to whichever model I want, which is pretty cool. So think about it. I have three ways of looking at the data. I can look at my data from the perspective of what was the first thing that brought the person to the site. I can look at every time a person comes to the site, what was the last thing that brought them? And then finally, in other places of Google Analytics, when I'm not looking at a user and I'm not looking at a session, by default, what's that attribution? Do I give credit to the first thing that brought them to the site, the last thing that brought them to the site? Do I look at every single thing equal? And that's kind of the way of looking at it. Okay, so we're using this, like we're talking about attribution. So hopefully you get a feeling what attribution is already, but let's talk about it. Attribution is the act of assigning credit for conversions to different ads, clicks, and factors along a user's path to completing conversion. So it's like a person did something because of a couple things. Who gets a credit, right? What gets the credit? The last thing, the first thing, so on and so forth. A model, an attribution model, could be a rule or a set of rules or data-driven algorithm that determines how credit for conversions is assigned, right? So the model is going to be the rules. The rule is we always give credit to the last thing. The rule is we always give it to the first thing. The rule is in this case, we give this much credit or that credit, so on and so forth. In Google Analytics 4, like we spoke about, at the event scope level, I can set up the attribution model in general for Google Analytics. You can see in the left-hand side, this is a setting that you set in Google Analytics, and you select what you want. On the right hand, you can see that we have lots of different types of attribution models, which we're going to go through in order to better explain the difference between these models. And you can see that Google Analytics allows account administrators to toggle between reporting models retroactively, changing the applicable metrics according to the selected model. What that means is if today I want to look at Google Analytics from the perspective of first click, I can do that. Let's say tomorrow I want to look at it from last click, I can turn that as well. And once again, it's that concept of being able to change things and look at it. It's a lot more available and applicable here in GA4.
That's pretty beneficial for an agency, huh, Danny?
So beneficial. All right. And important, like this last thing here, right? User and session data not effective. Like the cool thing is it's keeping all this data. Now, just how you look at it, very easy. Like you toggle it. It's like reminds me of like QuickBooks, because today I'm working with a new CFO, and my whole life I've been looking from cash basis. They want to look at from accrual, and in QuickBooks it's really easy. Just go to the settings, look at cash, look at accrual. So I can't believe I'm bringing in accounting concepts in a marketing class, but hopefully you'll forgive me.